unpack. We unpack. We unpack. Coming to you live, Boxing Ego Unpack. Yeah. We unpack. We unpack. We unpack. Coming to you live. Keith Thurman says that Errol Spence never went to HAYMON to make the fight. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Make sure you smash the like button. Also, subscribe to my channel for the latest and greatest in boxing. If you want to become part of the gang, notification gang, please hit the bell icon. Shout out to the Super Chats, channel donations, the Venmo donations, the Cash App, and the Patreon family. We working. Head over to Patreon. I've shifted some things around, and I'm going to dedicate some content to Patreon and channel members. I'm getting everything lined up, but we about to get that cracking. So head over there. It's a great way to support the channel and get different content. Another great way to support the channel is to click the link in the description box and get the ESPN Plus bundle. That includes ESPN Plus, Hulu, and Disney Plus. All three of those apps, one price, $12.99 a month, and it helps the channel. But during this quarantine, it can also help you. There's a lot of content. Disney owns a ton of things. They're constantly updating the catalog, and I personally have all three. It's a great look, and it does, again, help the channel grow. I'm about to buy some new gear and stuff for the channel, so holla at that link. Now, Keith Thurman, he did an interview. He did like a Instagram live, and he was asked about Crawford or Spence. This is what he said. He said, fighting Crawford or Spence, they're both great fights. I give priority to fighting Errol Spence. He's the unified champion right now. So it's funny because Errol Spence right now is what Keith Thurman was, a 2-belt champion. You know, obviously Keith Thurman being Mr. Glass, Derrick Rose, and kind of having those injuries that's plagued his career. In the latter part of his career, I guess you could say, he had to relinquish a belt, and then he ended up losing the other belt, the WBA, to Manny Pacquiao last summer. Keith Thurman goes on to say, I think Errol's done more in the welterweight division than Terrence Crawford. Errol Spence is someone I've had my eyes on for a long time. Crawford moved into the welterweight division and showcased his skills and talent consistently and constantly, but he hasn't gotten too many names at 47. One of the best names that he was recently able to fight and defeat was Amir Khan. But I'm all for that fight too. I love that fight. I've known that guy Crawford since we were in the amateurs. He's known me since we were in the amateurs. Seeing him at top level, seeing what he brings, and knowing that I've never been able to share the ring with him. I've never shared a sparring session, not even a sparring session by any means. He also talked about his fight with Manny Pacquiao, saying he wanted it to go on longer. He says, you don't think I love competition? I bring this to you, and I signed on the dotted line. I signed the contract, and I take another black eye. I enjoy it. In the Manny Pacquiao fight, I wanted a round 13. I wanted round 14. I wanted round 15. I wanted to be in the Coliseum, and I wanted to fight to the death. There is no stop. There is only go, you know. It's real love for the sport. You just don't get to this level without having a love for the sport. Just like other fighters, you can get fed up. He says you get worn down and kind of tired. At this level, we never avoid fights. He goes on, speaking of avoiding fights, he says, I never avoided Errol Spence Jr. I've never seen a contract. I've never legitimately been offered. He can say what he wants and what he wants to say after each and every fight. He never went to Al Haymon and said, Al, write the dang contract. Show it to me and show it to Keith. When I asked for Danny Garcia, I got Danny Garcia. When I asked for Sean Porter, I got Sean. I only called one man, and his name is Al Haymon. And I didn't have to do a lot. I didn't have to get on Twitter. I didn't have to talk to you to make the fight happen. I didn't have to talk to other media outlets. That's what I tell people. When people really want to fight, they can pretty much get the fight or request a fight. And if the fight is requested, I say no, then that's a duck. Then that's a dodge. We were almost talking about the Crawford fight, but I had Pacquiao in sight. It didn't matter who I had in view. I wouldn't have taken Errol Spence over Pacquiao. Manny's a legend, and he's bringing something to the table that none of the undefeated welterweight champions do. Interesting take from Keith Thurman. I disagree with him. I do think he avoided. I mean, people use the term loosely, ducked, avoided, stayed away from. Any way you slice it, I think when Errol Spence, he was pressing Keith Thurman's line and pushing for the fight. Listen, you don't want to do this with me in the comment section. Y'all don't want to go there with me because I've been on this platform for years. In fact, I helped popularize. I was one of the first to help really popularize and give you guys news clippings and talk boxing and really talk that talk on my own, in this digital space. So I covered all of this whole Keith Thurman, Errol Spence saga. And you know what? When it first started and Errol Spence was really trying to check for Keith Thurman's temperature, he's really trying to check his temperature. And then at one point, Floyd Mayweather, he did this interview with reporters, and they said something like, "Oh, Keith Thurman wants to fight you, Mayweather." And he's like, I got a guy he can fight, Errol Spence. And Errol Spence was right next to him. And Keith Thurman he said, "How about you beat Errol Spence? And then we could talk." He said something to this effect. And on my channel, people actually said I was making excuses and this was Floyd's attempt at using Errol Spence as a shield or a bodyguard and all this stuff. And I told you from the jump, the videos are still up. You don't have to take my word for it. You could go check the videos. But I told you guys from jump that it was actually a good idea. Because Errol Spence, I don't think he had fought Kell Brook at the time. He wasn't a champion. And he was trying to fight the big names and show what he was made of at that time. Again, this is pre-Kell Brook fight, before he went to Sheffield, before he fought Sean Porter or Mikey Garcia, So Errol Spence, we still had questions about him. Like, I had heard stuff about Errol Spence, and I was telling people that he was real dope, but, everything is validated once you can show us in the ring, under the bright lights, at the highest level possible against a name. That's what it's all about. There's a lot of guys that showed a ton of promise, Antoine Douglas and, guys like that, and they didn't live up to the hype that they were supposed to have. Recently, Carlos Balderas, he has received a lot of exposure, if you will, and he ended up getting stopped. So, it happens. This is not a knock on him. I'm just telling you, some people, all the Olympic promise and, things like that, you never know. It's boxing. It's the theater of the unknown, very mysterious sport. And at the end of the day, some people don't live up to the expectations. Audley Harrison, things like that. So I was pushing for Errol Spence versus Keith Thurman, and I know firsthand because I lived it and I did the reports. And some people they said I was wrong and I was in the wrong for pushing for the fight. And Errol Spence, they were using these little chintzy excuses and saying Errol Spence has to do more and Keith Thurman is a champion, so why should Errol Spence get to cut the line and, just a bunch of weirdo stuff. And I was like, man, it's a good fight. Fast forward to the future, Errol Spence continued for a while to keep pushing and pressing Keith Thurman. And I do think Keith Thurman was looking in the other way, and it made him look extremely bad. He wanted no parts with Errol Spence. Like, the level, he called out Pacquiao vehemently. He took the Sean Porter fight, Danny Garcia's fight, as he's saying. But when Errol Spence, who's still undefeated, when he was undefeated and before he had fought Sean Porter, before he fought Mikey Garcia, every opportunity that the name kind of came up, even in interviews, Keith Thurman, is like his whole demeanor and body language changed. I don't think, in my opinion, to avoid someone in boxing, it's not just, oh, send me a contract, and if you didn't send me a contract, then I didn't duck or dodge you. There's tons of examples I could give you where fighters, they could have fought somebody but they didn't pursue for the fight also. Like, okay, so let's from what Keith Thurman is saying, just hear me out. Keith Thurman is saying that he wants to now fight Errol Spence over Terrence Crawford, but they're both good fights, right? But he's saying he never ducked Errol Spence, and part of his rationale for saying that is because he's claiming that Errol Spence didn't go to Al Haymon to get this done. However, that's not how the business works, and I know that firsthand, because how do you know that Errol Spence didn't go to Al Haymon, and Al Haymon might have had other obligations or made certain agreements with other fighters for his brand and his business, where Al Haymon didn't decide to make that fight at that particular time? You know, when you're the head of a company, you got to make the chess moves that you feel is right. So how does Keith Thurman, just because it didn't get to a contract, that doesn't mean that could just be politics. That's my point. You know, that could be politics. That don't mean that Errol Spence didn't have a chat with Al Haymon and say, hey, I want Keith Thurman. I want Keith Thurman. So just because you don't see a contract, that doesn't mean anything. But beyond that is, if he's now saying, as he's not a champion because he lost to Pacquiao and he relinquished his other belt, and Danny Garcia and Sean Porter fought for it at the time, and now Errol Spence has that belt, which is the WBC belt, right? And he's saying, I didn't duck on account of I never received a formal contract, so you can't say I ducked. Then, and he said, all you have to do is talk to Al, ask Al. I asked for Sean Porter, I asked for Danny Garcia, I went straight to the source, I went to Al and got these fights made. So he almost shot himself in the foot by saying that, because if you knew Errol Spence was doing all these interviews, and I'm talking about back then, because right now, Errol Spence, if you listen to his most recent interviews, he said he don't even care about fighting Keith Thurman. He said he's not even considering Keith Thurman. He just literally said this on the PBC podcast, right? And I think he said it again on the Showtime, All the Smoke with Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson, right? So Errol Spence, he ain't even bothered. He ain't even pressed about Keith Thurman right now, right? But there was a point in time where he was just, it's very similar, eerily similar to Deontay Wilder, how he smoked out Anthony Joshua. Wilder was on Joshua's, you know what I'm saying? He was pressing him. He was doing interviews. He was calling him out. He was making Joshua look bad. He came up with the $50 million offer from his team, etc. And he did all this. He said he would go take a flat fee, fight for low money against Joshua in the UK. And then Joshua team didn't want it. You know, they clearly kept finding little excuses, or, oh, we got to fight Povetkin, or we don't want to come to America, even though they fought Andy Ruiz. It was supposed to be Gerald Miller in America for less money, etc. It's the same MO when it came to Errol Spence versus Errol Spence versus Keith Thurman, right? Errol Spence did such a great job and made it so obvious that Keith Thurman, because Keith Thurman was the Errol Spence of the time. He was the guy with 2 belts. He was the unified champion. He was the, the power puncher, had some good names on his resume, and previously was a talker. And Errol Spence made it clear that he said, man down, to be the best, you got to fight the best. I want to fight Keith Thurman, man down. And he was pressing him. And listen to what Keith Thurman is saying. He's saying all you have to do is contact Al. So this is still a duck, because I'm gonna connect the dots for you in case you haven't gotten what I'm saying yet. You're saying all you have to do is contact Al, or it's not a duck. You knew that Errol Spence was on your line. He was on your helmet, pause, and he was calling you out. He wanted all the smoke. He kept saying man down, and he was not now. Like I said, he's backed off of you now, because he's checked your temperature, seen what it was, and then, moved on. And he started getting his own big names and his own big fights and selling out in Texas and stuff like that. But at the time, you knew Keith Thurman. He knew that Errol Spence was constantly, harassing him, or whatever you want to call it, calling him out, because he needed that. He needed that name. He needed that recognition. He was trying to get his brand going. He had the faith and the confidence in his skill set that he would be able to compete with the best of them and beat a guy like Keith Thurman. You know, I don't know if it's true or false, but he had this belief and this confidence, right? And Keith Thurman is saying, oh, all you have to do is go to Al. So how come Keith Thurman couldn't go to Al when you knew this guy was pressing you? I made several videos. You could type in Keith Thurman, Errol Spence, Boxing Ego into the YouTube search, and I'm sure it'll pull up a lot of my previous work. And he literally just kind of told on himself. Keith Thurman said, I asked for Danny Garcia. I got Danny Garcia. I asked for Sean Porter. I got Sean Porter. So why would you not, being the 2 division or the 2 belt champion, not ask for Errol Spence when he wouldn't leave you alone and he was vehemently calling you out every chance he got? So this is a duck. And Keith Thurman, you know, I like the guy. I always have, but I call a spade, fair is fair, right is right. That's why I consider this a duck, because he just said the fight can get done, just go through Al HAYMON. So as the A side in that equation at the time, why wouldn't you go to Al HAYMON and say, hey, this dude's annoying me. He keep calling me out. I want to, you know, put him in his place. You could have done the same thing. You literally said when you asked for Sean Porter, you got it. You asked for Danny Garcia, you got it. So we all know what Keith Thurman was saying at those times when Errol Spence. Every interview was something different, kept moving the goalposts. At first he was saying Errol Spence is, you know, too much of a rook. He's way behind the ears and you don't always get what you want. You know, he was saying all this type of stuff. He said, when I first burst on the scene, my HBO debut, I called out Floyd Mayweather and I still haven't got Floyd. I called out Pacquiao and I couldn't get these fights. You know, these sob stories about he tried to get these fights and I called out Paulie Malignaggi. I couldn't get the fight. So what does that mean? If you want to smoke and he want to smoke, who cares who you called out? And, you know, that's irrelevant to wanting to fight Errol Spence. You see what I'm saying? So Keith Thurman, I do think he did avoid the fight because, like I keep saying, why didn't he ask for the fight when you knew the guy was on you? You know, you literally knew that Errol Spence was nonstop calling you out at that time period, and you did nothing about it either. Why it's a two-way street. Errol Spence at that time, let's say he had 19 fights. I don't know exactly how many fights he had, but let's say it's 19. Errol Spence had no belt. You know, he was working his way up to become Kell Brooks mandatory, you know. So he was doing the IBF route. He wasn't in a position of power. His name wasn't as big. His name wasn't as buzzing. He had no belt. He had less fights, etc. He didn't have names on his resume. So that doesn't even sound right. Why would the B side in that equation, outside of calling you out and saying, I want it, why would he be the one who's in charge of setting up the fight? You know, the A side would be the person with the leverage. That's like people don't tell Canelo what to do because he's the champion. He's the bigger name. He's the A side, you know? So why would it be different for Keith Thurman? Bottom line is Keith Thurman was well aware, and he was constantly being questioned by media about this kid Errol Spence, who kept hawking him and mentioning his name, and he did nothing about it. Like, he did, to this day, he hasn't fought him. He's saying, oh, I fought Pacquiao because he's a legend and stuff. Okay, well, Errol Spence, he could be a legend. You know, he could be all-time great. We have to see the rest of his career, but all I know is it's a great fight. You're on the same side of the street. There's no side of the street, and Keith Thurman didn't look like he wanted smoke. He literally, they said, oh, you're going to keep the fans salivating and make us wait for the Errol Spence fight. And he was like, nope, not going to happen, baby. 2018 is not going to happen. You know, this is my get back year and I got to get back. And he said this is my get back year. And then he got back and didn't even fight that year because he was injured. You know, he was getting in car wrecks and bumper cars and broken necks and hands and wrists and elbow spurs. You know, I'm not going to rehash every little thing that happened, but all I know is I covered this extensively on my channel, and in my opinion, there was ample time for Keith Thurman to respond as the A side at that time over Errol Spence to Errol Spence's claims of call-outs. If you really wanted to fight him, you're saying it's as simple as telling Al. Then why didn't the A side tell Al, hey, I gotta check your boy. Your boy is, getting on my nerves, or, boom, 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 boom. I look at it like this. In boxing, anytime I hear people start making up all these kind of weird things, oh, this person don't sell and nobody knows them, when the world and the boxing populace and public knows that that's not true, I'm not saying just some random club fighter, but you notice they do this and it's always fighters that diehard boxing fans are like, yeah, that's a great fight, I want to see that. But then you have promoters and trainers and fighters who will try to undermine that and minimize it and act like nobody knows or wants. Oh, nobody wants to see this fight. This is what they do to Charlo for Canelo. Oh, nobody wants to see, knowing damn well I want to see it. I'm an authority on boxing. I'm a person who speaks boxing and has a following. So how you gonna say nobody wants to see it? It's the same kind of behavior. Oh, nobody wants to see this. Nobody knows who Errol Spence is. And, Lomachenko did that to Teofimo. He tried to little boy him. Teofimo's calling him out, doing backflips after his knockouts and doing Heisman Trophy Fortnite dances, flipping over dead bodies after he knocked people out. And Lomachenko's like, oh, who is this kid? And he got to get a belt first and he got to do this, and the fighter starts sounding like more so like the promoter. This guy got to do this. He got to do this to be worthy of me, instead of just some old school stuff. Okay, Errol Spence is on the up and coming. Let me do what Mayweather did to Canelo and, disrupt his whole little flow and throw a monkey wrench in that train, stop that progress. But that's not what Keith Thurman did. Keith Thurman instead took the abuse, the verbal abuse from Errol Spence and the media and the fans, kept saying he was injured, playing the flute, long layoffs and all this stuff, and he never fought Errol Spence and he still hasn't. And it's hard to quantify and like really explain what I'm trying to say, but energy is transferable and it's something that you could just feel. I feel like the energy from Keith Thurman was never the same when it was Errol Spence. His name was brought up to fight Keith Thurman. It didn't look like he had the same zest or the same just really energy for it or the time for it. It looked like he almost uncomfortable, like he didn't want to answer the question. That's how I perceived it. Let me know what you guys think. Keith Thurman says he didn't avoid Errol Spence, but in my opinion, I just outlined why I feel differently. You guys let me know in the comment section. Did Keith Thurman avoid Errol Spence at any point in his career? Drop that in the comment section. Let me know what you guys think. If you love what I'm doing, smash the like button. Head over to the Patreon. Become a YouTube channel member. Hit the join button. Use the ESPN Plus bundle link. And that's it. We unpack.
So if you enjoyed this video and want more content like this on the channel, you can show your appreciation by going to the PayPal donate button or the YouTube support button, and you can donate any amount that you feel is equivalent to the value of this video. Much more to come. Thank you guys for your support. Boxing Ego, the future of boxing.